and I'd like to introduce to you my two panelists of today. Here at my right, we have Xiya Bastida, climate justice activist and co-founder of Re-Earth Initiative. And we have Daniel Truran, board member of B Lab Europe. Please help me welcome them. Great, so now we've heard some messages and insights about transparency, what does it mean for consumers, for parties, for media, for the broad society. And I'd like to begin with a very broad question, but in a few words, if possible. And I would like to ask you, what does transparency mean in the context of climate change?
So, surprisingly enough, for companies, transparency has become a risk. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's true, because the more companies share what they're doing, inevitably they're attacked, for good reasons. And at B Corp, we think that is not right. So I think there should be something that you share with transparency that is worth sharing. Now, the methodology is called measure what matters. And to me, that's really the important part, that you can see with transparency any kind of results that a B Corp has had. So you can see the 5 indicators very clearly. You can see exactly what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And that's the kind of transparency that you need to make that credible. And the second element is how this assessment that's used by 250,000 companies actually works. It's co-created. And co-creating something ensures a very much higher level of transparency. Co-creating the assessment every 2 years, the whole world is engaged in an open dialogue that tries to improve this methodology and make it more relevant and more important. So moving from risk to something you can proudly share and showing all that you're doing wrong, I think that's really what we would like to think is a right transparency.
To stop seeing transparency as a risk, but rather an opportunity. When we have data that we can trust, we also can see solutions and as the UN says, foster radical collaboration with companies or other groups of society that we don't think could be as an obvious relationship where we can find some opportunities for the climate space. Thank you. And what about you, Xiya? What do you think? What does it mean, transparency, in the context of climate change?
Hello. Oh, amazing. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I think for climate activists, transparency is exactly why it's a risk for businesses, right? Because when we have transparency, we know what to ask for. We know what to lobby for. And for me, activism is the practice of imagining and being creative of a different world that doesn't put people and the future at risk. So for me, that's why transparency is so necessary and should be mandatory across all governments, all sectors, all businesses, because if we don't know what to ask for, we don't know where we can go. And so we understand why it's a risk for businesses, but at the same time, I think we're at a point where we cannot afford to not know the truth. We cannot afford to not be honest with each other, and we cannot afford to not even, I think you see yourselves as disruptors of the business space in a way. And I think a lot of chief sustainability officers see themselves as activists in certain spaces, especially in their own companies. But they cannot probably go themselves and tell their CEO, you have to change this and this and this, fear of being fired or whatever it is. So all of these transparency frameworks can help for there to be outside pressure and for there to be the activism that is needed on the outside and on the inside to actually get to where we need to be. So I think transparency is the through line for honesty and for accountability and be able to measure success.
And also a bit on the responsibility that companies have, that or those who report, the chief sustainability officers. No, we also touch upon on a sense that transparency can also mean responsibility of sharing reliable data and things that then activists can later use. And in your two areas of work, because this is the richness of this panel, that we can have two different perspectives. What benefits do you see? What tangible benefits do you see when we foster transparency?
Well, a clear one is trust. When you really know what you're sharing with full transparency, the trust that you create with people is unique. And I think it's also very important to talk about communities. Yeah, we talk about co-creating things. So in the B Corp movement, for example, we see that when people are sharing with each other, they're helping each other. There's startups, there's huge multinationals, there's very young people, there's older people who maybe should change their ways. You see this across the board, these movements. And that's where it's important. It's just one company, two companies, five, you're exposed. But then when there's a movement of thousands of companies that really are strictly measured by what really matters and proudly say, I am one of the best companies for the world, things change. And what you're talking about, the motivation, and the motivation is not just the CEO, it's not just the young activist that comes to the company. In the past, still exists. You got this sustainability office. It's usually very green. Nobody uses plastic in the office. It's up on the 10th floor. That doesn't work. The whole company, from the cleaning person to everybody else in the company, has to feel it, has to feel part of it, has to feel a pride in this transparency, in what you're creating. And if you measure this, so how good is your company? What about yours? How good is yours? How good is yours? If you have a number, which the B Corp movement really provides, then you can really compare and create a competition for good. And that's what companies need. They need to compete for good. Right now, they've competed to have a biggest simple number, profits. There's a much wider way of going forward. And now we're seeing the proof that this really works with these new business models that make profits. Otherwise, the company doesn't exist, but not despite everything else. Because they're good companies, because they move forward. And when it's a movement of companies that do that, a movement of people that do that, you're strengthened, you're helping each other. You see really an acceleration of impact, which is exactly what we're trying to push at all ages.
Do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, I think this also goes on the topic of transparency also means transparency on challenges. And I think that's why companies usually don't want to be they don't want to share too much of the bad things. They only want to share the good things. And sometimes there is even resources that go into greenwashing. And I mean, for me, B Corp, every time I see the B Corp stamp, I feel like a sigh of relief. You know what I mean? Like, if I see a company that I don't know about and it has B Corp, I know I can trust it a little bit more, or actually a lot more. So it's a standard that you're setting, and it's a really important standard, because when we see companies, and that's just such a broad term, if we don't know what they're struggling with, then we don't know what we can push for. And then that's where I think a lot of them fall into greenwashing. And I think what they forget is that when they greenwash, they're losing our trust. And it just doesn't make sense to lose somebody's trust when you can be honest about what the challenges are so that we can move forward together. A few months ago in UN Climate Week, the World Economic Forum convened 10 activists and 10 companies together. And I was there among the group of youth activists. And the companies were not your usual suspects. It wasn't Patagonia or IKEA or the ones who are already engaging with youth activists. It was P&G, MasterCard, Meta. It was companies that are not necessarily like on their full sustainability or transformative pathways. And what we told them is, well, first of all, you need a youth advisory, because I think youth need to be in every single space for a company to be able to think about a future. Because if you have people in your company who are thinking of the year 2100 because their grandkids are going to be alive then I think you're ensuring that your company has some longevity beyond your quarters or whatever it is, right? And what surprised me was that one of the companies said, I had never ever thought of having a conversation with a youth activist. And another one said, why does it have to be an activist? Why can't it just be a young person? And I said, it's because you have to ask yourself if you're willing to be challenged. Are you willing for somebody on your team who works with you to ask you the hard questions? And only with the hard questions can we get to the right answers. So yeah, that's just a bit of like how we have tried to push companies and just tell them it's a no-brainer to actually think of the future and think of what is going to be your biggest market. 87% of people under 30 live in the global south, which is usually the place that is most affected by pollution and industrialization and just, low regulations where companies can do whatever.
Thank you, Xiya, and thank you for asking the hard questions. I know you do this a lot, and this is why you're one of the most recognized activists in the climate space. And I want to keep the conversation with you for a bit because I would like to talk about your organization, Re-Earth Initiative, because you focus on the intersectionality of climate change activism. And I want to ask how transparency can help bring a more inclusive climate movement.
That's a really, really important question because when I first started going to COPs, which was COP25, 95% of the youth activists were from Europe because it was in Spain, because it was easy to get there, because most of the information on climate is in English. About more than 70% of climate information is in English. So there's just no knowledge, there's no resources, and there is just so many barriers. And I think what we wanted to do at Re-Earth Initiative was decentralize the climate movement in a way and say there are people from all over the world that not only have stories of what the climate crisis could do, but what it has been doing. And if we don't have the voices of the people that have been affected, when we're imagining different worlds, we're gonna ignore what the challenges can be. And that's what's happening with the green revolution, if we're mining lithium and constructing a new system off of another mode of extraction without including the people who are going to be affected, then we really, really have to ask ourselves what world are we building and if we're changing any paradigms. And so that's why it's so important to show that the climate movement is this fully diverse body of people from all over the world that at the end of the day, we want to create the solutions that are as holistic as we are. And I think that is the key. And transparency for me, what it really means is creating a full picture. And I see all of the little drawings of the global stocktake in the back. And, the global stocktake is also about that, showing us the reality of where we are and the truth of where we are. And if we don't have a clear picture of where we are, we cannot even think of where we can be. So yeah, my organization, we give grants to frontline communities to do restoration projects. We translate to 5 different languages. We have youth in 27 countries. We're trying to change what it means to be a youth activist.
Thank you, Xiya. Daniel, I want to bring out the salesperson in you. I want to hear how can you convince companies to join the B Corp movement, because I want to talk about reporting. Sometimes companies see reporting as a burden of a huge process, and they complain, so many information they need to gather, and I want to hear from you, what do you say to them? How can transparency systems, as your certification, can actually help the private sector to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and to make a better to keep on moving with the climate action and the climate commitment? What do you say to them?
So first thing, and just to show you how better salesmen are, do not become a B Corp. Instead, in Spanish we say ser B. Don't be a B Corp with the certification and everything else, just be B. Yeah, which is much more important. So the assessment is for free. Any company can look at it, join it, look at their score, improve, find ways forward without becoming a B Corp. B Corp is a bit of the lead, the top of the top. Is not necessary. Companies desperately need to understand what being B means, what really have in their DNA this way of working, because we're showing that it works. What has happened in the last 10 years? We co-founded B Lab Europe 11 years ago now. Then it was all greenwashing, to be honest with you. It were all companies that knew what they had to do, but they were not really going forward. What is happening now is green wishing, which is a huge shift from write something about it, about how can I do this? Last May in Amsterdam, with people from all over the world, 1,200 CEOs gathered for 2 days to study how can we move this forward. The majority B Corps and many who wanted to be B, saying how can we move forward. In my life, I've never seen so many CEOs stop for 2 days to say, how can I be a better company? How can my company go forward? And the energy that created is unstoppable. And again, companies need to say, this works. I'm not going to be a fool and just step into the depth. And so this works, this model works, and then these people together really find a way forward. And that energy, that certainty, that going forward, again, you do not have to be a B Corp, but please be B, because that is the essence of changing things around and really bringing I think it's a sense of pride. Why are these companies more successful than the average? Patagonia, Natura, EcoAlf, all these companies, why are they so cool and successful? Because people that work there says, I'm proud to work there. Imagine all your staff is proud to work there. What happened? Much more productive, much more exciting, much more connected, and it goes forward. Again, not B Corp, is BB.
I'm seeing. On that point, I go to UPenn, which has the largest business school in the US, the Wharton School of Business, and everybody there wants to end up in Wall Street or in consulting. But I have seen a shift, even though I'm like one of 12 environmental studies majors in this my full generation. We are making a shift in there, in that there's petitions going around with my peers saying, I will not work for a fossil fuel company. I will not work for a banking that, like a bank that does this or that. And it's just to see that the top talent of youth in universities right now, we're all organizing across the world to choose where we want to work and choose that, and know that now we don't really have to compromise a salary for a job, because the money going into the renewable energy sector and the sustainability sector and sustainable fashion, etc., is increasing, because we are just not willing to put our talent in any company that is destroying the world any longer. And every person that has been my roommate, that was all randomized, they all switched their majors to be sustainability and environmentally related. And that is what we're doing to each other as a generation. We're really shifting the way that we want to operate in the world and the legacy that we want to leave. And these shoes are also B Corp. I just wanted to say.
No, and it's also important here, the transparency, because for people entering the workforce, without transparency, how can we find information of where we want to direct our professional careers to, right? So I think transparency also plays a role in here. So I'd like to open the floor for one question, because we don't have much time. If you want to raise a question to the panelists and be brief. No questions? I am sure you will have questions at the end of the panel, and you can approach our panelists. Well, we're bringing this event then to a close. Not before, I would like to reflect on some of the impact that we received today. We've heard that transparency is a tool for parties, but also for consumers, for activists, for businesses. We heard that transparency builds trust in the process of the Paris Agreement, especially now with the transition to the enhanced transparency framework. I love the fact of changing the perception of risk to opportunity, how transparency is actually the way to do that. And last but not least, what Together for Transparency stands for, which is transparency builds community, and we engage all groups of society, and that's why you're here. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you all for attending this session. Thank you very much.